Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Mountain Relic session. Mountain Relic is a raw black. This is going to be a great session. We lumped it. Lumped is not the correct word. We grouped it with the greens because in essence, raw black is a form of a green. Now, if you repeat that to anybody, they won't believe you. And not only will they not believe you, they'll try and argue with you, especially if they are in the tea industry. But by the time we finish today's session, you'll know why what I said is technically true, even though it doesn't sound right. All right, so we're going to focus on that. Before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about what's occurred in the shop this week. Aside from breaking down all the cases of new tea that we've gotten in, which was a wonderful thing to do, and getting yet another set of goods from China at the end of this week, it's been, those things have all been good. But I want to focus on all of you because two of you were in here this week. And two of you had a very interesting situation, which was extremely useful in terms of what we've been doing. So Xiaobei was sitting with Kate, and I usually don't use names, but since this was such a good thing, I think I should use your name, Kate. And she had a tea for which she didn't, I prepared it for her. And Xiaobei had no idea what I prepared for her. And I was involved in something else. So Xiaobei, Kate said, do you know what this is? Xiaobei looked at it, looked at the color, and then Xiaobei said, what does it taste like? And instead of saying, oh, it tastes like, chamomile, or it tastes like Earl Grey, or any of that stuff, Kay went right to how we do things here and said, it's not sweet. So immediately, this gave Xiaobei an idea of how to proceed because she's looking at the color, not sweet. And then further, she said, what else? Not fruity. Okay, so basically, and this was a red tea, it was clear that it was a red tea, basically took Xiaobei out of Yunnan, essentially took her out of Yunnan. And Kay gave her a little bit more information on flavor profile. And Xiaobei, from that information, which is what we've shared in terms of the techniques of how to give information, was able to immediately say, well, this has to be an Anhui or a Fujian. I said, well, it's a Fujian. And she nailed it, radiance. And that came from Kay's great ability to really give pertinent information. So when we have somebody new that walks through the door, we frequently have this question of, what is it you like? And people are kind of stumbling around because they haven't thought about it very much. They really know subconsciously what they like, but it's very important as we're asking the questions to get them to give us enough information. You are all now equipped to immediately give pertinent information and get us to the places to where we need to be. So that was one great customer experience from this group. The second was Rob was in here this week and gave him a cliff tea. We did not tell him what cliff tea it was. And then he and Xiaobei were talking and he started right away in the quality arena. Smooth, round, a little cooling aftertaste. It was wonderful because these are the experiences you're learning from these sessions. And you all are obviously growing greatly in confidence as you go through these sessions, and you should be, because you are getting it in terms of how to really analyze these teas, how to really understand these teas. All right. So let's go ahead and start down the Mountain Relic road. Raw black. How do we deal with raw black? Well, first off, let's get our non-confusion hats on, because we're hearing raw eggs. I don't eat raw eggs. We're hearing black. Oh no, I thought that this was supposed to be closer to green tea. So let's go through the process of how this is made. First off, it only refers to puer, P-U-E-R. Sometimes you see it spelled P-U-E-R-H, from Yunnan province. There is no other tea that is referenced by the term raw black. None. Only puer. So why do they use the word raw and black at the same time? Well, part of this is a translation issue, because in Chinese, when you have artificially fermented a tea, like puer, it comes out very dark. Usually it has an earthiness, a woodsiness type of flavor. And it's a composting methodology, right? And so in Chinese, the Chinese say, shoupu. Shou means mature or cooked, cooked thoroughly. And so in English, we look at that thing, oh, this is fully cooked, fully done, so to speak, fully composted. But what do they call in Chinese the not fully done, not fully composted? Shengpu. Sheng technically means uncooked. And so the result is, some wiseacre decided, okay, raw. And it's a puer, which is a black tea. Okay, raw black. So that's where that terminology comes from. Now, we've already located where this is from. It's from Yunnan, and it's southern Yunnan, probably about 40 miles from the border of Burma. Beautiful, beautiful area. Lots of ancient trees. This is ancient tree. This in particular is about 1400 to 1600 years old, and it's large leafed. So that gives you something of the setting. So this is a spring pick, and it's down to 3 leaves, a bud and 3 leaves. That's basically what you're getting with Mountain Relic. Ancient tree. All right. So after it's picked, what are these farmers doing? Well, let's think about what you would do with green tea. You'd wither it a little bit, right? You wither in order to make the tea leaf pliable. If you don't wither and you try and process a tea leaf, you end up tearing the leaves apart. So you have to do some withering, but you can't do a lot. With green tea, you don't want to do more than about an hour's worth of withering. With raw black, you know what? You can do more. You can do 2 or 3 hours if you want. So again, that removes the moisture from the tea leaf, and it brings that moisture down to about 70% of what it originally was. Okay, so far, we're close in processing. We're picking, right? Both we're picking, and we're withering. One short, one long. All right, so let's denature the oxidation enzyme. What's involved with that? Well, it's heat. You either have heat from frying, or you have heat from steaming, or you have heat from baking. So with most green teas in China, it's heat from frying. Not all, but most. In Japan, it's mostly steaming, but for the same reason. You're trying to denature or render useless the oxidation enzyme. It won't work once it gets over 150 degrees. So that's why you apply heat, and in both cases, you do it. Both cases, what two cases am I talking about? Green tea, raw black. Green tea, you're doing it very hot, usually between 300 and 400 degrees. Very hot and relatively slower compared to raw black. So green tea, you might do the frying for 12 minutes. Raw black, you might do the frying for 8 minutes or 9 minutes or 10 minutes. Now, every farmer is a little different, right? Because the recipes are a little different. Family recipes, local custom recipes, regional recipes, all of these are different. But the principle is the same. You're denaturing the enzyme, the oxidation enzyme. High heat with green, lower heat with the raw black. Why? Well, aside from cultural preferences, there is another specific reason. Because when you use lower heat, one of you is going to ask me, I can already feel the question forming in your heads. Wait a minute, you said 300 to 400 for green. You didn't tell me how much it is for raw black. It's usually around 200. So it is considerably lower, and it's usually for maybe 2/3 of the time that it would be for green tea in terms of the frying. So why are we applying less heat to raw black? Because we don't want to kill all the microorganisms. This comes from the forest. There are microorganisms all over these plants. Are these microorganisms good for anything? The answer is yes. They're good for creating the conditions for fermentation. All the microbial agents, fungi, molds, bacteria, yeast, all of those things. If you fry between 300 and 400 degrees, you kill everything. If you're at a lower temperature for less time, these things go into stasis. That is, they shut down, but they're not dead. They just shut down because the condition's too severe. All right, now, in some green teas, you denature and you roll at the same time. So dragon well is an example of that. Peacock tongues is an example of that. Usually it's the bud teas. You'll roll and denature at the same time. With raw black, you got leaves in there. You're not going to roll, and you can't roll because the bulk of it is just too hard, and you have to be in that frying pan forever. And that's not the game plan for raw black. So at the conclusion of frying, you then roll. And you usually roll, if you're doing it by hand, on a bamboo mat that's cross-hatched, and you have all these hand motions. And if you're really good and coordinated, you can do this, and you end up with a wonderful result. If you're foreign and uncoordinated, you do it, and everybody says how good it is, and then they throw it away when you leave. So that's that step, yes.
Culture used for fermentation is wild versus, say, a specific strain or a particular organism grown in a lab. Is that correct?
Now, this is a great question. The culture for fermentation, is it man-made, grown in a lab, or is it out there in nature? So it depends on what you're trying to do as a farmer. If you're doing raw black, it's always out there in nature, no exceptions. If you're going to do artificially fermented, composted tea, it's usually a combination of what's on the leaves plus what you have. Much like kombucha, you have something called SCOBY, which is, you know, a clump of microbial material that you use every time you put in, and you kind of plant it in with inject it in, and that's how you get the fermentation material. But in raw black, it's not done that way. It's what's in the forest. So this tells you something right away. Every forest population is different. Every microbial population is different. This is part of the whole terroir. So you not only have the varietal difference, you not only have soil difference, but who's living in my tree? You have that difference as well. And these all make a difference at the end in terms of what the final result is going to be. All right, so we've rolled in both cases. With the green tea, sometimes it's very elaborate. With raw black, it's always longer and elaborate. And then lastly, with green tea, you bake. Why do you bake? Because you want to reduce the moisture to the legal level to export the tea. Why would you want to do that? That sounds like extra work. If I'm not going to export the tea, why not skip that step? You know, I'm a good business person. Let's just go ahead and skip that step. Well, you're a good business person. If you're thinking like this, you're a good short-term business person. You will have one wonderful season. Next season, nobody will buy from you ever again, because your tea will mold after 3 months. So you gotta get that water level down to 5%, 6%, something like that. With the raw black, at this point, you have two choices. Actually, you have one choice, and then you have another choice after that. So let's say it correctly. You've rolled it. The next thing you must do is not bake it, but to sun dry it. So you have baking versus sun drying. So what does sun drying do? What's the value of sun drying? Sun drying wakes up the microorganisms. The microorganisms that went into stasis, they love that sun. Time for me to get up and do my work and start the work of fermentation. Conclusion of that, then there is one more choice the farmer can make. The farmer can say, okay, I'm going to keep this loose leaf. Farmers, by and large, don't keep it loose leaf. Or if they do, they keep it loose leaf, they store it so that they can use it later to do a cake. But generally speaking, not much loose leaf goes to the market. There's some, but not much. Most of the time, they compress and add steam. Now, this is very important because this changes already the flavor profile. And we'll talk about the science of this in a minute. Let's see how oh, no wonder the tea master is salivating over there. Well, it's time for me to bring up the numinous tea master. And she will walk you through the brewing. She'll demonstrate and then she'll brew with you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So today we do black, huh? Yeah. Yeah.
Same as usual.
So,
See your tableau.
yes. Tea leaves. So
So what she's going to do is no different than if you were brewing a green tea. Going to heat the glass. Remember that the water to actually steep the tea is 170, but when you're heating the glass up, you can use 212. You can use anything between 170 and 212. And we tend to use hotter because why do you want the glass heated up? Well, there's two reasons. You want to make sure everything is absolutely clean. Second reason is when you put the dried leaves in, you're going to get the first indication of what this tea might be because it's going to have an aroma and you'll see the look of it. You'll smell the aroma. Remembering aroma and taste are very closely interlinked. This gives you the first idea of what this tea is going to be like. Also, from a brewing standpoint, the leaves will get the flavor into the tea liquor faster when they're heated. And Xiaobei is structuring the water. Remember, our temperature here is set at 175. So she's structuring it, dissipating the heat. Needs to be down to 170 or lower. She does it one more time. And she picked up baggie number 3, pre-measured for 6 grams, shakes the leaves in the heated cup. Ascertains, oh yes, this really is Mountain Relic. And adds the water. 2 minutes steeping. Make sure the other cup is heated as well, the receptacle cup. All right. So we got through the steps of the raw black and we came to the end where the farmer makes the decision to compress it, to sell it as a tea cake, or to let it be loose leaf. What's the advantage of compression? Easier to store, first off. Easier to ship, second off. What's the disadvantage? When you don't see the process, it's harder to see the process of the change of the leaves over time. What does that really mean? What that means is this tea is going to continue to ferment for some period of time. In fact, it'll ferment for around 30 years before it becomes, in quotes, completely fermented. Is it fermenting at the same rate in year 1 as in, say, year 10? Answer is no. Well, why else is it changing? Because there's also oxidation, which starts to pick up. In a way, fermentation and oxidation are kind of two, not are kind of, they are two distinct processes that are working on changing the nature of the leaf. Which one is dominant in the beginning? It's the fermentation process. Oxidation, as with anything that ages, is a slow process and it picks up prominence after about 7 years. All right, so the timer has gone off. Tea master is going to separate the leaves from the tea liquor. Notice how she gets all the water out of there. And so we're going to go through the quality arena. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to smell these leaves. This is done at 170, so you can actually get a pretty close smell of this. So there's a couple elements of this that I hope you're able to detect, because these elements are very typical for raw black. You notice the color of this tea. And this is really important, because if your color isn't like this, then something somewhere is wrong. You smell the tea liquor? Okay. And now you're going to enter the quality arena. So you're going to take a 170-degree sip. You're going to let this flow around your tongue. And now, and at that time, then you're going to make some judgments about it. Here's some of the judgments you're going to make. Is this thin or is it dense? Is it viscous? Does it coat the entire tongue? Does it only coat a portion of the tongue? And when you swallow it, you may or may not detect an aftertaste. If you detect an aftertaste, is it sweet? Is it minty? Is it cooling? All of these things are possibilities. Lastly, as you drink it, some of us may get a sense of the energetics. And why do I focus on the word some of us? Because every one of us is different. And every one of us is genetically, genomically not the same. Therefore, our abilities to detect things are going to be different. And how we detect them is going to be different. That's why there isn't the Numinus's master book of tea definitions in terms of aromas and taste. Cannot exist because we detect things differently. What we do is put up guardrails. So the guardrails mean that when you take this sip, by the way, I am going to take the sip and then get you on your way to your brewing. So that when you take that sip, you don't say blue cheese or garlic, because those are outside the guardrails. So let's take that first sip. So remembering the last 2 weeks, we did green tea. And I've gone through the differences. And think about that as you're taking a sip of this, because it is very different than green tea. And so as you're telling me the attributes of this, think of it in comparison. And yet also think of the similarities, because there are similarities, because as you went through that process, you see it's not so dissimilar. Okay, I've made my notes. Your turn to brew. Usual setup for this. Set your timer for 2 minutes. Make sure your water is about 170. Going to air anyway, air on the side of the cooler. As usual, first step is to heat up the cup. Make Make sure that everything is really, really clean. So Xiaobei is structuring the water. She'll do as well, as you already are at the temperature. Baggie number 3 into the heated cup. And you add your water and set your timer for 2 minutes. Okay, so we note that the raw black, you can see the similarities to green, but you're also going to see or taste or mouthfeel the distinct differences between the two. And that's why they can be talked about in the same breath. They aren't exactly the same tea, but they're relatives. They're cousins. So, and this is processing cousins, not varietal cousins. So I ask you this, because one of you is going to ask me this question in a minute. Is the chemical configuration of green teas and raw blacks the same? And the answer is no. And in fact, they've done an interesting study where they compared it also to whites, which are lightly oxidized, very lightly oxidized, to the raw blacks and green teas. So obviously there's a range in each category, isn't there? Because every white tea, every raw black, and every green tea is a different varietal, different farmers process it differently. You get somewhat different results, but there are ranges. And so what they found is that white tea, without question, has more flavonoids than the other two. Oh, timer has gone off. Tea master is going to separate the leaves from the tea liquor. Good, and you will make sure that yours looks somewhat similar to this in color, close as it can. From my perspective, if I were to describe this, I would say it's greenish with a tinge of yellow for the color perspective. And then you're going to go through the quality assessment here. And one of the things you notice right away is that the leaves have nice greenishness to them, little bits of yellow to them, a little bit of brown to them. Very fragrant, very fragrant. Then as you go through, you're going to notice some things about mouthfeel as you enter the quality arena.
Wow, the scent of these dry leaves is intoxicating. It smells very fragrant and fruity. I get strong notes of dried.
Love this comment. Strong, fruity, dried apricot. That is the dried leaves, right? Immediately, there's no fooling around with this tea. In other words, the tea leaves right away talk to you.
Really coats the tongue.
Coats the tongue. Yeah, my tongue's still coated. Continue thinking about that. And as you are, I'm going to make one other comment. So the volatile compounds are reduced by about 3/4 in raw black through the rolling process. But very surprisingly, it's reduced a further third if they compact it and steam it. So this is why if you ever get a raw black that's loose leaf and then you get the same thing as a cake, they will taste different. They have to taste different because that process of compacting and steaming reduces the volatile compounds.
Wet leaves have a very bright, tart fragrance with vegetal notes.
Love this. Wet leaves, bright, tart fragrance, and a vegetal note to them. And I love this. You captured something and you've used exactly the right language. And I love the start where you used dried apricot and we worked our way over to tart and vegetal and bright.
Smooth, heavier feel than green tea.
Smooth, heavier feel than green tea. Absolutely on the money. Green teas are the gentle people of the tea world, so to speak. They inhabit the elite areas. These are more of the rambunctious in terms of aroma, in terms of flavor. But again, you can tell that they are processing cousins.
I taste a hint of tartness.
This commentator tastes a hint of tartness. Yes, there is that.
Is there a subtle umami that we detect?
Great. I was waiting for this. Is there a subtle umami? Oh yeah, more than subtle. This is very umami.
Wet leaves have that vegetal umami scent and the dried apricot scent of the dry leaves, and the dried apricot scent of the dry leaves then moves more towards the background.
So the wet leaves have umami, and then the original comment about apricot aroma, which was in the dry leaves, recedes. It's in the background. It doesn't go away. It's in the background.
Slightly tannic.
Slightly tannic. I like this comment. There is a dryness and a bit of tannic that you did not have in the green teas. So it's clear to me you are thinking and comparing, even when you don't say that directly. This is, as opposed to the green teas, tannic, but not in an unpleasant way. That's the nice thing about this.
This tea feels very warming. With just one sip, I can feel the effects.
This tea feels very warming. One sip conveys the effects. Love this comment. And I'll tell you why. For me, as I do raw blacks, the look tells me it should be cooling, but the actual feel of it is warming. Why is that? Well, the main reason is this is ancient tree. Remember, almost all the ancient tree, we had this same dichotomy with otherworldly. You may remember that is the ancient tree white tea. You drink the tea, you're thinking, oh, white tea, I'm gonna have a cooling effect. No, in fact, a warming effect. Ancient tree brings warmth by and large.
The tea gives me a drying sensation that starts with a sip and then gets more intense in the aftertaste.
Drying sensation that starts in the sip, but gets more intense in the aftertaste. I like this comment a lot because this means you are truly in the present. You're truly in tea rhythm, because this mirrors very closely how I detect this tea. That yes, in the beginning, yeah, it's real tea. I get that dryness, but oh my gosh, as it goes down, not only does that dryness intensify, it stays in the mouth. Not only do I have viscousness on the tongue, I got dryness in the mouth. Okay. If there's no other comments, we'll move forward. The one element that you didn't mention, but I didn't expect you to mention because this is really, really difficult to detect. And it's not a flavor that Westerners typically deal with, is there's a hint of bamboo in this. Just the smallest hint of that. And so if you ever hear somebody describe, oh yes, this has hints of bamboo, don't be put off. We're still within the guardrails. There are hints of bamboo in this. And remember, think about this process for a minute. Where is this tea withered? Well, aside from outside, I meant on what is it withered? It's withered on bamboo. But that's not the real essence of where we're going. The real essence is they rolled this from 45 to 90 minutes. Let's see, what are they rolling it on again? Oh, cross-hatched bamboo. So there's definitely an element of that. And some of you may ask the following question. Okay, why don't I taste that in the fully fermented tea? And the answer would be that the fermentation process is so deep, it wipes that out. And other flavors come to the fore. But within this, the bamboo is still present. And I'll tell you exactly where you'll sense it the strongest. When you finish drinking this cup of tea, smell the cup. When you smell that cup, you're going to have, oh my God, there is a little hint of bamboo in here. Yes.
Gently enlivening, feeling more clear-headed now.
Gently enlivening, feeling more clear-headed. Me too. It is enlivening. And this is a type of tea. While it is, well, let's back up. I love the comment. That's on the money. And where I really want to take us is don't drink this before going to bed. Because if you drink this before going to bed, yes, you'll be all warm. It'll be great. But you'll be warm with your eyes open. And that's probably not great when you're trying to go to sleep.
Rambunctiousness ramping up, headed to full wiseacre.
Rambunctiousness ramping up, headed to full wiseacre. Love this comment because, you know, I'm headed there too. Maybe that was a comment really about me. You can tell that I'm headed there. Thank you for the comment. Good comment. All right. Let's see how I'm doing. Oh, I'm doing okay still. Okay, so I was telling you that scientists have studied greens, raw blacks, and whites together and compared. And I was mentioning that the whites were highest in flavonoids. Surprisingly, the greens and the raw blacks are very close in terms of catechins. And the raw blacks have more of the so-called, and this is a case where I don't like having to use these large words. In fact, I'm going to use a simpler large word. I'm going to use phytonutrients, so, or phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are little molecules within the plants that help the plant develop, prevent pests from decimating the plant. They serve all sorts of functions helpful to the plant. As it turns out, some of those phytochemicals serve very useful functions to humans. And in the raw blacks, it's a richer phytochemical arena than in the greens. So that was an interesting outcome of this. So you might ask me, because the same thought already occurred to me when I was reading this, what if it's by varietal, or what if it's by manufacturer that this situation occurred? And even the scientists said, we need to do more research. These were the preliminary. And by the way, it wasn't one green, one white, and one raw black. They, I believe, had 57. So 30 raw blacks, 14 greens, and 13 whites. But that still doesn't tell the whole story, because the raw blacks were all from one area. The greens were from one company, and the whites were from one company. And so again, this begs the question of, well, what if it's a processing modality that is producing these differences? The great news is that scientists are starting to focus on these type of questions, because for you as a consumer, and actually for all of us here at Sophie's, why is it we drink tea again? Yes, we want a healthy, really good tasting beverage. It's nice if it prevents this thing or prevents that thing. It's great if it adds an extra 10 or 20 or 30 years. All of these things are true, but that's not the primary reason we're talking about this. We're talking about this from an enjoyment factor. Yes.
In that same vein, one of the participants observes it's interesting how tasting notes differ through our cultural lenses. She never would have guessed bamboo, but could definitely taste a sort of woody flavor, and wonders if there are any more flavors that we would not catch as Westerners.
The great commentary. So this commentator says basically that when we express opinions or ideas about anything related to aroma or related to flavor, we're actually comparing it to known flavors. And where do these known flavors come from? They come from cultural context. And so the questioner further, or the commentator further then says, are there, or asks, are there any other types of cultural indicators for this? I believe for this particular tea. Yes, for this particular tea. Yes, there are. And actually, all of you did catch this at the beginning, but it's rare that you see this in literature. And you said tart, because this does have tartness, which is an unusual way to describe tea, but this definitely does. And the Chinese actually identify that quite commonly. They, for this type of tea, they're looking at such things as umami, they're looking at woodsy, they're looking at that slight tartness, and at the bamboo. They also, it's very funny. And this is really a cultural flavor. And that's why I didn't even bring it up before. But this comment makes me bring it up. And in fact, there's a whole article about how raw blacks many times have hints of fermented soybean. And since most of you have not eaten fermented soybean, that discussion never came out of my mouth. And it was only because you asked this question. But it's a great question. The other thing that many times raw blacks will be compared to, again, is not something within our usual cultural milieu, is hawthorn. So you hear all of these in China, but I would not expect to hear hardly any of them here, because that isn't our cultural milieu. Yes.
In an interesting connection, a participant says that he's read that perception and language are linked. And so, for example, in cultures that do not have distinct words for blue and green, they have more difficulty distinguishing between blue and green.
Love this comment. So this commentator is talking about, in general, communicating ideas, basic ideas, is related culturally to what you're used to experiencing. So if you don't have blue or green in your language as a color descriptor, how will you ever get that? Or if you live in Alaska and you have 100 words for snow, you cannot expect a homegrown Californian to have more than one word for snow. Oh, white stuff, snow.
Another taster, again, on this issue of a cultural perception, culturally based perception, she detects a leafy vegetable that in the Philippines they call malunggay, but out here in the West might be known as moringa.
Oh, interesting. Moringa, M-O-R-I-N-G-A.
M-O-R-A-N-G-A is how she spelled it. But maybe it's.
In China, they have an M-O-R-I-N-G-A, which comes from the same area. And I'm wondering, I don't know whether this is the same thing, but it's too close to be coincidental, I think. And in China, by the way, that M-O-R-I-N-G-A is seen as a new herbal product helpful for energy. And I don't know whether in the Philippines it would be the same with the M-A, you said
M-O-R-A-N-G-A.
or M-O-R-A-N-G-A. Yeah, yep. So a great catch on this, by the way, because yes, where you grow up makes a difference. And that's why we're so careful here when we hear comments. And that's why we have the protective guardrails, but the guardrails are quite wide, because we understand all of you come from different starting spots, and it's the cultural starting spot. And that's why when we're in China, we love hearing their descriptions. And we internalize those descriptions. And sometimes when Xiaobei and I are talking to one another. So yesterday, we broke out a new tea that we got, and we used a description that was very much what they would use in China, but would fall on deaf ears here because it's not our starting point. So all of you are correct to point out that that's really, really important to consider when you're evaluating these teas. Great job on that. All right, we are closing in on the finish, and unless there's any comments, I'm gonna wrap it up right here. So we put these three together as a group because, again, from a processing modality, they're close enough, especially at the beginning part of the process, to be called relatives. Raw black that's aged for 30 years will no longer be close enough. In fact, once it gets to about 10 or 12 years old, it's no longer close enough for most people to recognize, oh yeah, this is not that far distance from green tea. But fresh after the processing, it's close. It's more forward, and you all identified that. It's got more hints of fruit than any green tea would normally have. And again, that's mostly because of the rolling and the intensity of the rolling. Also, the microbial agents help create that as part of the taste profile. So that's why we group these three together. And now I think you get, when we say green tea and raw black are relatives, you get the sense of why that's absolutely true, especially at the starting spot. So we covered that today. And we had this opportunity to have what is in China considered one of the best raw blacks that comes from the particular region it comes from. Yes.
Well, and as part of the wrap up, somebody observes, this is why tea can easily lead to deep philosophical discussions. Tea, taste, perception, language, culture, meaning of life.
You know, I love this comment because I'll start with the end of it. Tea leads to many things related to the meaning of life. And then the commentator enumerated many things related to culture, related to language, related to perception, also related to presence and rhythm. So one of the things that's really important about what we do is this tea rhythm. Tea rhythm, we have called it tea rhythm, but really what it is about being present. And you can use this idea about being present with anything and should use it. Anytime you come to a crossroad and can't make a decision, be present and put yourself in that mode before you try and make decisions. You'll find it's extremely helpful. Yes.
Two final questions. One, how long was this tea aged?
How long was this tea aged? This tea is 3 years old.
And for food pairing, somebody's thinking about steamed. Who doesn't think about steamed dumplings all the time? But what would pair well with this tea?
What pairs well from a food pairing with this tea? And the questioner was hoping that I would say steamed lamb dumplings. I'm not going to say that. What I will say, though, is that steamed vegetarian dumplings would go very well with something like this because this can stand up to that. In addition to that, I would say that this is something you could have after almost any type of a nice lunch, because again, this is not going to be sharp. This is not going to be overridden by any tastes or flavors you have in lingering in your mouth. Just remembering it's got to be done after lunch. If you do during lunch, again, anytime you take any tea and mix it while you're eating, you're not going to get the full range. But again, the beauty of this tea is after you're done eating, and after you've had that final dessert, just relaxed, this is a great tea to have. All right, wonderful comments that you all had today. Really liked how you talked about the tea today and about the other ideas that we discussed relevant to this tea today. Next week, we start a new series. We're back to the reds again. And we're going to start with a big one right at the beginning called Opulent. And then we'll have two others, National Treasure being one of them. I think Classic the other. I can't remember, but it's 3 reds for sure. So at any rate, I want you all to have a very healthy and great week. Really look forward to seeing everyone next week. Bye-bye now.